This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal. The sea harbors many dark legends. Her waters filled with harrowing tales of those brave enough to master her power, only to find themselves tossed mercilessly into the sea by her unpredictable ways. Cursed to roam the seven seas for all eternity aboard the ship that brought them their demise. From antiquity to present day, sightings of phantasmal ships have appeared across the world. Some blazing bright, illuminated as if on fire, others described as if in a state of eternal celebration, music and laughter being heard from the shore, while some others are taken below deck as slaves for all eternity. The souls of these drowned sailors have even been said to appear before locals, visibly wounded or even missing limbs. Tonight, we explore two infamous phantom ships hailing from opposite hemispheres of the globe, both mired in murky lurches of maritime history. So join us for a look at the phantasmal El Caliuch of Chile and the haunted Chaleur ghost ship of New Brunswick, tonight on Into the Portal.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we are back with a brand new mystery.
It really is.
Yes, we are discussing Phantoms of the Sea.
Yeah.
Very creepy. And we've got two amazing legends to share with you all tonight. Before we dive right into that, though, we do want to just quickly update you all. So we have a new Patreon mini-sode that is set to be released tonight.
Yes.
And this is going to be really exciting. What we've done for all of you is we've decided we'd like to give you all a special Christmas present, which means that we're going to give you a little preview of our Patreon. So yeah, this is going to be a free app for all of you to go ahead and preview. You can listen to the entire thing
That's right.
on our Patreon page for the next 2 weeks, so up to the new year.
Right. Are you going to give a little, what's it about, Amber?
Oh, well, this one is another legend that hails from Australia.
Yeah.
And it has to do with UFOs. It has to do, possibly, it's an unidentified flying object,
right,
technically. So in that regard, it's a very interesting case, and a lot of history, a lot of myths and legends around it. So we're going to get into that this week or month.
Definitely. So pop over to Patreon and make sure you guys check that out, because we just wanted to give back to everybody who listens, and obviously we love you all. We're super appreciative of
totally. And so we will have that link just in our show notes. So episode description, make sure you just scroll to the bottom of that, and it'll be in our links.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just it's a fun way for us to sort of push our Patreon a little bit, and we
definitely, we really love doing the show, so it's like Patreon is the way of actually, chipping back, right? It's literally like a cup of coffee. It's like a cup of coffee a month. And
you get something in return, and we get to gain a whole new member into our community, which we love to interact with all of you.
Absolutely.
And you give us so much fulfillment, and it's the reason we do the show. You guys keep the lights on, and I know that is just a bit of a cliche to say, but it is true. And the show has grown so much in this last year. We're almost reaching a full year that we've been doing this.
I know, right?
So really what we want to be able to do is dedicate more time and more energy, and we simply just need a little bit more income to help us kind of reach that sort of new level.
Yeah, that's right. And just a bit of a push.
Exactly.
Bit of a push.
So like Andrew said, for literally the price of a coffee. A latte, people. You'd buy us a latte, right?
And you get and we really make it worth your while. So the people that have joined us on there, I think, are really happy, and it's just going to keep improving the content's I'm excited for what we have coming.
Me too.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Yeah, and then one other thing, before we get started here, reviews. We didn't have any new ones today because iTunes was being a bit of a jerk.
Yeah.
Apple Podcasts and iTunes, we hopped on there to like we usually do every week. And we're missing like half our reviews. They kind of just ganked them from us, which
Weird.
We've heard from some other members in the podcast community that has happened to them too, and that they kind of come and go and disappear, and it's just this weird phantom review page on iTunes, which is fitting for this episode, I suppose. Yeah, it really sucks.
Yeah,
so
it does.
lots of your guys' reviews that have left on there are currently missing. So if you guys haven't had a chance to leave a review, please hop on there and do so, especially now that we've kind of hit a little bit of a road bump here with Apple Podcasts. We'd really, really appreciate that.
Let's fight the good fight against Big Brother, which is iTunes.
That's right. Okay.
So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
All right. Like we said, we are discussing Phantoms of the Sea, otherwise known as ghost ships.
Right.
And so we all are familiar with the idea that the sea is kind of her own master, I guess we could say.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It harbors many dark legends filled with harrowing tales of all sorts of, I don't even know, like drowned sailors. You get the classic one, right, is the Flying Dutchman.
Sure. Yeah.
And we're not discussing that tonight because it's just a little bit too mainstream.
No, like the Dutchman, and there's a bunch of other ones. Like there's literally, if you look all around the world, there's about hundreds of ghost ship stories.
Totally.
And just to make the clarification, too, actually, I don't know if you have that in your section of notes here at the top, but like the differences between a ghost ship and a phantom ship.
Let's get into that.
Okay, so because today on the show we're not really doing ghost ships per se, because in the sense that like a Mary Celeste or a ship like that, like an abandoned ship.
I see what you're trying to say.
Where
Okay.
you find a ship, there's nobody on it, and it's mysteriously abandoned, and it's like a ghost ship floating around. Or like the Dutchman, it is like an apparition. It is a phantom ship that comes and goes as it pleases, and may have more supernatural powers to it than just being a mysterious ghostly ship floating in the sea. So there's the clarification there.
That's important, yeah. And I didn't even really think about that.
There you go. Perfect.
So there we go. So yeah, we aren't discussing physical ships that have shown up on, like just abandoned, whatever. These are legit phantasmal ships that have been sighted offshore by hundreds of witnesses over the years. Very similar to a case we actually discussed with Brian and Angela over from Double Density when we did our cross-country paranormal checkup tour.
Shout out to those guys.
Because we covered the teaser, which was a very interesting case, and that was it from the 16th century? It was an early schooner that had been...
1500s, I think you're right. Yeah.
Exactly. So that ship actually had documented proof of it going down in flames in the harbor.
Right.
To which it was consequently cited for decades and hundreds of years afterwards, and still to this day, right? Under the right conditions, people see the teaser appear, and then they see it basically get engulfed in flames, and then the crew comes out, and they're, like, literally, this is how detailed it is, where the crew is out there, and they're trying to put out the flames, and they're, like, panicking and all this stuff.
Scrambling around the deck.
Yeah, exactly. Like sailors jumping off board.
Right.
Like the thing.
I'm not sure if I'm getting confused. So that's the teaser was the one in Northumberland Strait.
Yeah.
Right? And on the East Coast. Okay, sure. Okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
All right. But for tonight, we will be going down south for the first story of the evening.
All right.
Yes, we will actually be discussing a Chilean ghost ship known as El Caluche. Yes, this is definitely more than a ghost ship. This is like a spirit of the Chilean seas that has existed in Chilote lore for centuries, from the earliest days of the Spanish conquistadors. So at least 1600s, probably even, 1500s, even earlier than that.
So so this isn't like modern Chileans. This goes way back before
It really
pre-Columbian
does.
contact.
And it continues to be cited to this day.
Very cool.
So what is it? It is, like I said, a ghost ship, and essentially what people see are... they see basically a massive ship that is just like illuminated by the heavens come out of the mists on certain days, and it's always it's always in this one specific area, and it's just offshore of the island. Oh my gosh, the island of Chilote.
Chilote. Okay.
Yeah, the island of Chilote. It's near the southern point, and essentially it appears out of the mist in full bloom, mass billowing bright white, as if illuminated by the heavens themselves, as I said.
Wow.
So this is more so considered a mythical spirit in traditional chill-out folklore. And basically they say that the ship and its helpers, which we'll get into in a second, keep the sea cleared of bodies by bringing them aboard as crewmen to forever man this phantasmal ship.
Okay.
Pretty cool. And so essentially this sort of mythical sort of entity is said to roam to wherever it's needed or to wherever its next victim can be found and then consequently bargained with, if you believe the darker tales of the El Caluch.
Okay. All right.
So this is
All
fun.
right.
I never heard about this one before this week. That's how far ahead we planned this episode. Just give that away.
It's coming up to Christmas. It's been a bit of a grind.
We've got a lot of fun stuff coming up, though.
No,
I'm
we
really
do.
excited.
We've got some...
But yeah, I know, it's such a fascinating tale. I would say that one of the most interesting aspects of El Caluch is that it is a very celebratory seeming, it's almost like a party is going on forever on this ship.
Okay.
Is how it's described. And a lot of legends tell how El Caluch is actually said to appear before native Chilotes every New Year's Eve. And it's almost as if the dead are coming back to say hello and celebrate with their lost loved ones.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so I have this really cool quote here from Esoterics. It was actually a guy named Stevers, which wrote about the El Caluch in 1935. And this is what he said. The Caluch does not always slay those who see it. However, oddly enough, the natives of Karen Mapu tell of seeing it every New Year's. The procedure there to raise the ghost is a beach party, New Year's Eve being in the summer season of Chile, with plenty of liquor and good cheer. So they go to the beach and they just celebrate, and then the ship shows up. And then just to continue on, he says, sometime after midnight, the Caluch is sure to appear, a result which we can reason out as we would like from the procedure used to evoke its appearance. That was a really confusing quote. Sorry, guys.
I wonder if that's even like translated.
It is definitely translated.
Yeah, it
for
sounds
sure.
like it is.
Yeah. So essentially he's saying there that they kind of raise it up as if they're almost, it's like a resurrection, so to speak. Or maybe not so much a resurrection, but they're just simply calling out to it.
Right. Like at specific times, like on a New Year's or something
Exactly.
like that. It reminds me of almost like a Day of the Dead or something like that, where it's like more celebratory than not.
That's actually a really good way to phrase it.
Scraping up the dead bodies around the area, though, to bring into your crew sounds a little bit more like Pirates of the Caribbean-esque.
It's very interesting, because obviously this has to do with the lore of the afterlife for these people. And just the idea that, say, the tragedy of losing a loved one on the high seas, or say they're fishing and then they end up getting swept out to sea or something.
Yeah.
Just the idea that you could maybe see them again on this ship, and that they are still there, but they're sort of existing in tandem to our reality.
On a party ship.
On a big old party ship.
That's
the original cruise line for the dead.
Yeah, this was like Caribbean cruises or whatever that. Or not Viking River Cruises.
Oh, the Viking River Cruises.
That's too small. I'm trying to think of like a big one.
Oh, Princess Cruises.
Or
even Disney Cruises.
Sure,
hey, they have crazy things. Yeah. So this is such a fascinating tale. And interestingly enough, though El Caluch has been described by many people who've cited it, a lot of people will say that it is sort of an enigma, and that it can't really be described because it doesn't resemble anything except itself. Which is weird, right? Because you would think like, oh no, we're talking about a ship. Like obviously it's made of wood, it has sails, it has masts, it has whatever, it has crew, whatever.
Cannons maybe or whatever. You're like, sure.
Exactly. Okay. But it's interesting. This is a woman who studied the ship. Her name was Gabrielle Mistral. And she had some interesting things to say on this regard, specifically the description and the appearance of El Caluch. And she said here, basically, El Caluch cannot be described because it resembles nothing except the Caluch. Pushed to define it, one can only stammer negations. It is not a whale, although it appears so in its knack of overturning fishing boats. And it is not a ship, although it is called for no other reason other than that it navigates. So it's on the water, therefore they call it a ship.
So there's stories of it legit like turning over boats.
Yes.
Fishing vessels.
Yes. There are. I didn't actually come across any specific things that I could quote for the show tonight. But yeah, there is definitely a lot of that. There's the idea that it's uncatchable. So it's basically like this phantasmal, I don't want to call it a mirage, because like it almost seems that way, where it's like you can never reach the end of the rainbow because it just keeps getting further and further away from you type of thing.
Yeah.
But essentially, yeah, that's kind of the case here.
Interesting. So it's like,
So the way I kind of described or thought about it in my head, I was like, hey, it's kind of like half Ghost Ship, half Moby Dick.
Well, that just makes me think it's some sort of, I mean, yeah, like it's clearly taking on the form of whatever it's around, because like when it's in the form of a ship or someone sees it, it's I think you have that just down below here, because like what does it actually look like as a ship? Presumably it's a Spanish ship, right?
It is definitely. It's basically described as having 3 large masts, 5 sails each, and it's a beautiful bright white ship, clean as a whistle, brightly lit from within.
White
Because it's
like glowing.
Exactly. It's illuminated.
Okay.
Seemingly from within, and a lot of people say that that's from the party that's going on inside. And you can hear the sounds of celebratory drinking, partying, dancing, singing, all this stuff. People, being ruckusy and riding around. But interesting enough, people that see this ship above the waters can also describe how it all of a sudden disappears. Like just poof, it just dips under the waves, under the surface.
Okay.
And it can navigate under the sea at will. So very similar to the Flying Dutchman in that regard.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
so you can see, like there have been cases where you can see the illumination coming from below the surface, that type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so cool though. And it is definitely considered almost like a shape shifter. So again, like this Gabriela Mistral, in her book Panorama y Color in Chile, says here, suddenly on the loneliest of these southern nights, the Caliuch emerges and runs a long course in full view, navigating at full steam, almost flying, without permitting herself to be overtaken by any whaleboat or poor fishing launch which might try to follow her. The fleeing thing, in the sight of fear-crazed fishermen, is a phosphorescent mass whose deck swarms with sea devils and a tribe of witches very like them.
So that sounds a lot more ominous than hearing partying going on
Oh,
board.
exactly.
It sounds more ritualistic, like as if
Mm-hmm.
this has been summoned.
Exactly. So that's where you get the first reference there of these sea devils and witches. There are definitely brujas and brujos, whatever you like, it's feminine, masculine, whatever, involved in this sort of lore, and they play a very important role. They are essentially the masters of the ship.
Okay.
Exactly. So how I alluded to it earlier, where it's like the souls of the dead will essentially have to make a pact or a bargain with these people in order to actually gain entrance onto the Caliuch. And then there's also people... Yes, there's also the people that don't end up partying, okay? So, yeah, these sinister spirits, or sea devils as they're referred to, basically can come at will on board the ship. And it's basically this, like, it's just like a free-for-all. So there's a lot of good stuff going on where people are, like, they're in eternal party mode, that type of thing. But then these people can show up and kind of, like, flip the switch. And then there's also these sort of, almost like phantasmal water horses.
What?
And these, like, spirits that ride on them. And they're, like, considered these evil brujos type things. And they can basically bring the souls of the drowned to the decks of the ship.
Right. So
and then that's how they're sort of brought to the... Yeah, to the place where they'll make a deal for their soul. And, okay, so this is where we get into the layers of the onion here, which is basically the hierarchy of this ship.
Okay.
Because there are the people that have been granted this extreme privilege, right, of just being, like, forever having a great time. And then there's the people that don't get that and are basically forced to work as slaves of the ship and keep the ship running. So this is like the actual crew that's like manning the decks and stuff, and essentially they're trapped outside in the cold to man the ship miserably for all of eternity. Okay. And I don't even know exactly how this comes about, like if there's a sort of morality involved, like the good actually gain entrance and then the bad don't, or how this is described. Like, it was kind of vague. But essentially, yeah, like, there was one account that said that, like, people could be kidnapped. And so, like, fishermen and sailors and stuff that aren't careful can actually be kidnapped and brought aboard the ship. And essentially what happens is they're mutated to an extent where they aren't human anymore. So they become monstrosities themselves, and their heads get turned around and their leg gets twisted. So they only have one good leg. And they're just mangled so horribly that they can never leave the ship because of their sheer monstrosity.
That is such a sweet plot for, like, a horror movie.
Doesn't it kind of remind you of Bootstrap Bill in, like, Pirates of the Caribbean?
Absolutely. It's, like, almost like a mix between that and... Actually, well, no. It's pretty much exactly that. Because, like, those guys couldn't die. They were, like, perpetually cursed or whatever. But it almost reminds me of The Void, too. That section where there's, like, that room... Not to get too gruesome, obviously, because we're not clicking the explicit button for this episode. But that room where it was, like... those bodies that were like trying to die but couldn't.
Yeah.
You know
so essentially,
like,
that could I imagine if you are like that. I could see it being like a bootstrap where he's trying to kill himself because he's like, I don't want to be out here anymore. I don't want to do this, and you just can't.
Yeah.
So these evil warlocks or like brujos or whatever you want to call them, that sort of make these pacts with people. It's interesting, right? Because the way it's described here, this is from another website, just Via Adventures. And it says here, still others claim that the Caliuch is crewed by warlocks who make magical pacts with certain traders, offering them prosperity in exchange for dark favors and promises. Okay, so this is where we're getting into another sort of layer again, because people have actually claimed that individuals in the Chilote culture that have experienced extreme wealth and good luck, a lot of people say that they have made a pact with one of these brujos.
And these are like the indigenous people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, just to be clear.
Exactly.
That's okay. Mm-hmm. It's like selling your soul.
Exactly. Yes, totally. And like we kind of alluded to, it is a shapeshifter, so it will disguise itself to maintain its sort of like, I don't even know, like to maintain its status as this sort of ambiguous, sort of spectral, sort of, I don't even know what you would call it. It is like a purgatory.
Right.
Because you're not really going anywhere.
But it's almost like purgatory is a place or a concept as a place. And this is like a moving, morphing, shifting purgatory. Mm-hmm. It's like a little micro version of it that moves around in the shape of different things, which is freaky deaky.
And you get both. You get the good, you get the bad. Eternal punishment, eternal celebration.
Depending on who you are or whatever you're into.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Okay.
So I did get into a little bit, like, trying to uncover, was there anything, like, historically relevant for this? Is there any basis in reality? Was the El Caliuch a real ship at one point? It's very vague.
Yeah.
A lot of people do try and brush it off as simply a legend. But apparently Spanish conquistadors do have records of a ship called the Calanche. The Calanche.
Okay.
So very similar. So El Caliuch, the Calanche, yeah.
Close enough,
possibly. And it did disappear in the early 1600s. And it disappeared in this ship called the Strait of Magdalene. And this is the same place where the El Caliuch is said to appear.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So it is kind of one of those places where it's a very dangerous waterway, I would imagine. And so a lot of ships did join El Calanche in the watery grave.
Right.
And it's interesting, I did come across some other accounts that were saying that they saw El Caliuch appear and that she was followed by a sister ship that was also similarly like illuminated from within and very phantasmal, and it actually was so closely resembling another ship that did disappear. It does have historical records of disappearing and drowning, or not drowning,
the crew
going down, and the crew drowning. Yeah. So that I thought that was really cool. Really neat.
That's, yeah. I mean, obviously when there's things you can fall back on like that whether or not you can find the exact name, the Caliuch, I think it doesn't matter necessarily, because we're going back a long way here.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, think of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ships that have sunk.
Exactly.
Nearby
and
there.
think about, just a side point here, ships would change names.
Yeah, they would.
And I know that we did come across this with was it the Cyclops, the case that we covered, where it changed names because of war? Or it changed names because of ownership, and they just, right,
which is, of course, that's bad luck.
Bad luck.
Juju for doing that, right? I mean, that's what happened to the Mary Celeste and different ships like that. Don't change the name, people.
Just don't.
Yeah.
If If you christen it, that's the way it's going to stay.
Right.
Okay.
Unless you go to christen it and it's like that scene from Caddyshack where they just snap off the whole front of the ship with the bottle. It doesn't even break. Anyway, didn't think I was going to slip a Caddyshack reference into this episode.
Get a bowl of soup with that?
Buy a hat like that, you should get a free bowl of soup.
Oh, the Dangerfield. Oh, so good.
So good.
Okay. So that was all I could really uncover on the historical end for this case. But there's some cool philosophical elements. I was reading through Esoterics. They did this awesome, really long blog post about this stuff. And they did focus exclusively on El Caliuch, and they happened to bring Foucault into the conversation.
Oh, goodness.
And for all y'all that have never heard of Michel Foucault before, let's just say it'll just explode your brain.
Yeah.
It's just one of those ones where he gets super effing philosophical, and
it's
to
really
the point
cool.
Where it becomes the point where he deconstructs what you take to be natural reality to such a far degree that meaning breaks down everywhere.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Right.
But he had some really cool things to say about the ship, not ghost ships, but just ships in general as a site of perfect otherness. And the phraseology of that is like interesting, right? Okay, so a site of perfect otherness. So otherness as in anything defined as that which is not the self.
Right.
So anything that exists in contrast to what you sort of feel is your own identity, kind of a thing. And this is where we get into ideas of the abject, that which is wholly other, that which must be radically eliminated in order to maintain the boundaries of self and identity.
Right.
Is kind of the loose definition of that.
Exactly. And just to give an example for people, so you can have a physical example, would be like Frankenstein is the
Beautiful
classic example, right?
Yes.
So it's like it's very, very much like you, but not to the point where it's abject and you have to get rid of it.
A lot of notions of the abject do play into notions of monstrosity.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly. So anyways, so the ship as the site of perfect otherness. Okay, so this is actually one of the most understandable quotes from Foucault that I've come across, and I was very impressed with.
Just understandable. Okay.
So I'll just give
it the title of the book?
I'll give it a quick read here.
Okay.
Anyways, okay, so he says here, the boat is a floating piece of space, a place without a place that exists by itself, that is closed in on itself, and at the same time is given over to the infinity of the sea. And that, from port to port, from tack to tack, from brothel to brothel, it goes as far as the colonies in search of the most precious treasures they conceal in their gardens. You will understand why the boat has not only been, for our civilization, from the 16th century until present, the greatest instrument of economic development, but has been simultaneously the greatest reserve of the imagination. The ship is the heterotopia par excellence. In civilizations without boats, dreams dry up, espionage takes the place of adventure, and the police take the place of pirates. End quote. That was from 1984.
Interesting.
But I just thought that was really, really interesting. The idea that a ghost ship or just a ship in general can be seen as the pinnacle of otherness, a site of eternal punishment, all these sort of things, right? It's almost like a dislocation from the constraints of every other place of reality, right?
Absolutely. Well, and the line I love the most out of that quote is obviously a place without a place. And that ties into the whole idea of a phantom ship. It's a place, you see it, but because it's without a place, it disappears. Right? It can't stay, and you can only see it in certain circumstances and whatever other ingredients need to come into play.
It's a place without a place. It's like defined by its ambivalence and the ambiguity that surrounds it.
Right.
Which is very, very fascinating. I absolutely fell in love with that quote when I saw it. I was like, okay, well, this is a must include.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's interesting because it's the idea that the rules of civilization are either modified or absent in the setting of a ship, which I find he refers to it as heterotopia. I would sort of ascribe more of like masculine heterotopia to that.
Okay.
Obviously, Bonnie and Reed would be exceptions to that, right? In the whole like lore of pirates and the lore of the seas and everything else.
But like not even exceptions to it because they had to pretend to be men.
There you go. Exactly.
Right? I mean, they were exceptions because they were women, but they
were exceptions because they were falsities.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they did. Yeah, exactly.
It's not like they broke the mold and were like, I'm a woman pirate, and everyone was like, dang, that's pretty badass. Like, no, everyone thought they were men.
That's very true. Especially Mary Reed.
Right.
Like, Anne Bonny was a little more ambiguous about that.
Right, because she was kind of, yeah. She was on the hip of the other.
Exactly, with Red Beard or whatever. Or Calico Jack, right?
Red Beard.
But anyway, this place without a place, I think you can even just like broaden that to more of what we talk about on the show too, right? This idea that there are sites around the world that are almost these in-between spaces. It's almost like the cracks in the drawer where things slip through. And a lot of the times it's a mix and it almost defies explanation or definition.
Actually,
right?
That's so cool. You should just give a loose definition of that article you've been reading on the Yaku gears and the idea of the cracks and the idea of the world as like a dresser with and it's really cool and it ties into this.
I wish I had it right in front of me.
That's okay. I mean, you know the gist of it. Though.
Totally, yeah. So I was reading into the Yaku gears, and that's a traditional Siberian culture.
Yes.
And they have existed for eons, right? And they have a very rich oral tradition of a lot of things, and they have their own explanations for UFOs, for aliens. They essentially believe, and for things like, say, overhunting. They don't actually consider the disappearance of, say, a population of elk as them just being killed off. They basically say that the elk have gone elsewhere.
Right.
What is elsewhere?
Yeah.
So essentially what they configure as elsewhere is this series of drawers. You can think of it as like a cabinet, and there are 3 layers, and then within the 3 layers there are individual drawers within those, and then within the drawers there are even smaller compartments, and so everything has its own compartment. And so say a Yeti would exist in a place that is adjacent to our reality but in a different drawer.
Sure.
And so obviously there are things that are closer to our world than others.
Right.
And so what the Yaku gears kind of configure is this idea that when things slip through, that's when we get things like the unexplainable.
Yeah.
So things like a UFO appearing overhead or something. And so I honestly love that. It's this idea, this beautiful, eloquent way of sort of configuring, it's the same idea of the analogy of the bubbles, right? Universes existing in bubbles that are right beside each other, and they're all over, and some are more adjacent to others, and all this kind of stuff.
And they're all touching, right? And the same idea with the drawers. There's these cracks, and there are these connections between all of them, but they're not wide open, so to speak. And that's what shamans are for, or brujos or brujas in this case, potentially, right?
To bring you closer.
To perform a ritual, to be able to change form and be able to travel to and from these other compartments.
Totally.
And possibly with this ship, if it's being summoned, or if it's a spectral entity of some kind, I don't know, that could tie in.
Totally. So even to extend that further with the Yaku gears, so they consider it a vital process of almost like recycling. They don't see it in the same way as like Buddha's reincarnation and stuff like that, but they do see it as a necessary process where the soul must be sort of passed on to its next state kind of thing. And so this applies to humans, this applies to animals. They basically are interchangeable. They see a human can actually become an animal spirit. They can kind of like transmutate. Yeah. And then this can be temporary, can be permanent, depending on the severity of it and the intentionality of the person.
Absolutely.
But again, just to reiterate, like the article I was reading in particular was talking about overhunting and how the Yaku gears don't really listen to the sort of environmental, ecological kind of viewpoint and perspective, because they do adhere to this sort of epistemology, I guess I'll call it. Yeah. And in particular, so essentially if a Yaku gear man or hunter goes out and finds a lot of deer, or no, not deer, like elk or whatever they're hunting, they will kill them all. They'll kill them all. they'll take the choicest cuts of meat that they want. They'll leave what we would consider to be a lot of waste, but they don't consider it waste. Like, it's just this...
It's different epistemology.
It's bizarre for me the way I'm describing right now, but anyways, yeah, it's very cool. But just the cracks in the drawer is the main sort of thing. So if you hear us referring to cracks in the drawer, we're talking about Yucca gear epistemology. Yes. But very cool, right? Because then, again, right, these are spaces of otherness. These are spaces where we don't really fully understand the rules or anything. And so when we do get glimpses or hints, then... glimpses of, say, the El Caliuch coming up out of the depths of another, dimension or whatever. Like, I don't know.
Well, that's the thing that's most interesting to me. Like, you've got questions down here. I hope I'm not stepping on
go for it.
Here.
Let's have it.
Like, one of the big ones I have is this idea that one people see it as a ship, but then it can kind of like, it dives down into the sea and leaves not as a ship, more like it'll almost be like in the form of a whale or something like that.
Totally. It's like semi-sentient. That's how it's described.
And that is like, that's very ghostly, like shape-shifting, appearing as one thing and then another thing. Not just a damned ship that is stuck in like a purgatory. You know what I mean? That is more of an entity in and of itself.
Totally. Mm-hmm.
And then this whole monkey wrench of the Brujas and Brujos being involved too. Well, Brujas and Brujos, as we know them, or had touched on them in our, Las Brujas episode, they're physical flesh and blood sorcerers and witches and warlocks for the most part anyway. I mean, you could...
That's the confusing part to me, because I'm not really so well versed in that specific sort of segment of mythology that, like, I'm not sure. I think they are just talking more so to, like, these, like, sort of evil spirits.
Like actual spirits.
Or sorry, I don't even want to say evil. Like, they're just spirits, that are kind of like... They do have sorcery, like, type powers.
Right. If you're kidnapping fishermen and, like, forcing... Like, that's pretty dumb. Like, that's a hell ship. You know what I mean? Like, you're being taken essentially to, like, work for all of eternity.
That's very true. Ship. Exactly. So it's like, what are these people? Are they, like, Satan's, like, helpers or something? But there's also other things, too. Like, there's these, what I refer to as those spirits that ride horses that are kind of... I saw them referred to as the Serena Chilota sisters, which are basically mermaids. So there's that element, too. There's a lot of stuff going on here.
Very much so.
We got Ghost Ship, we get... Moby Dick phantom type thing, we get sorcery, we get mermaids, we get all this stuff.
Totally.
And actually, I forgot to mention this here, but El Caliuch actually comes from this traditional indigenous word called it's spelled Kalewtun. So essentially Caliutan, which means shapeshifter.
Oh.
And so that's where you get the idea that it changes into a marine animal at will to sort of disguise itself and that type of thing. But yeah, it's... I know you looked up the pronunciation before the show, but it's just like, I feel like it should just be the Caliuche.
It just sounds like so, like, out of Pirates of the Caribbean or something like that.
It does. I know, right? I don't know.
So
the question I have to ask you now that I've sort of presented this whole thing to you is, what are your thoughts here? Do you think this is more of a ghost ship, or do you think this is kind of a metamorphosizing spectral entity thing? Kind of like what we saw with 50 Berkeley Square. That's kind of what I was thinking it could be similar to. Like,
if you were going to try to draw lines, that would be the one, as obscure as it is, to draw lines to, just because it has... elements of ghostly apparition, but also just like weird in between. This phantasmal monster that's kind of in between. I have, when it comes to ghost ships, like, for the most part, the stories are typically like, a ship, it was a pirate ship that sank, and they're just, they were all gonna be going to hell anyway because they were horrible people or whatever, and so they're damned, or they were cursed by locals or something like that, typically is the thing. So it's like a purgatory situation. I have a feeling that this one is more of a... I don't know, I sound so crazy in my explanations, right? But it's just almost like... It's like a sea ghost. It's like it's some sort of like an ancient ocean ghost of some kind. And potentially the reason why it takes on the shape of a ship or a Spanish galley, as the El Caliuche, is because... I don't even know, like, the last time there was a real violent incident, maybe was during, the 1500s or something, say. And so that's what its main form is. so to speak.
Or you could get the idea that the sightings occurred after the formation of the mythology of this sort of a ship, right? Of something that will take in all these lost souls at sea.
Right.
And then from there, when the Spanish arrived and these amazing ships came, and then they witnessed the destruction of several of them in that specific strait, then maybe they could have added to the lore. But the one thing I did come across with this one is the idea that it wasn't too heavily tainted. There's like an even mix of conquistador mythology and traditional Chilo mythology. I apologize if I am mispronouncing that as well.
Okay, but seriously, like, we type it in on Google or like try to get like an audio clip, and it's like half the time you get them and you're like, that can't be right. Like, I'm not going with that. Like, yeah, like, that sounds worse. I'm just sticking with my mispronouncing.
We're not going to stress about it too much.
Yeah. Well,
but it's cool, right? So, okay, so we get this sort of weird amalgamation of sorcery, mythology of a shipwreck, possible cryptozoological elements, and then this, like paranormal tinted sort of thing.
Like some sort of a giant glowing white whale.
Yeah.
Cryptid.
And it is cool because they do describe it as being like phosphorescent, illuminated, like this, like, you know, spectral, like from the heavens type thing, but they never describe it as being on fire, which we did see with the teaser, right? They did describe how, like, literally this ghost ship would appear in the Strait of Northumberland and off the coast of Nova Scotia or New Brunswick or Newfoundland. I don't know, New something.
I hope Brian and Angela listen to this one.
But essentially, they would watch the actual sails like go up in flames,
burn up.
Yeah. So there is
that's
discrepancies.
very, very different. That definitely, like a glowing light. It almost sounds like it's like the light of the moon type light. The one thing I'd be curious, and obviously, like, you couldn't find any stories that described it specifically, but like when it dives beneath the water, if like a wave is created or if it just disappears like without a trace.
Oh, that's a good question.
Look, or if there's like a like
a wake,
like a wake created from something submerging.
Yeah. No, I never. But the idea that it's responsible for overturning fishing boats, like, that is kind of effed up, right? Man. Like, is that just a conflation of, say, like a giant squid or giant whale attack on a ship? Like, or, you know, a shipping vessel. Fishing vessel.
Could be a shipping vessel as well.
Sure, that makes sense. We're shipping ships. It's a ship of ships.
It's a ship of ships. Yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of this one, honestly. Pretty strange.
I love the whole element that you get, kind of the heaven and hell stuff too, within the setting of purgatory, where there are people having a miserable time, and there's people having a hell of a time on the other side. They're just partying it up. It's really fun. We're not going to get too far into, like, theories, skeptic arguments, and all that until the end, until after we present this next case.
Yeah, I've got a case to present, too, on the complete other side, well, not other side of the world, but kind of, sort of.
Other hemisphere.
Yeah, exactly. But before we do, we're going to stop for a promo break for two of our favorite shows, and some good friends of ours, over at the Cryptonaut Podcast and Graveyard Tales Podcast. Yeah. So you guys listening are probably super familiar with both these shows. They're awesome.
They're so good.
Both are different in their own right, but both are hilarious.
They're so good.
They're super funny.
They've got their style down pat.
Styles down pat.
Just nailed it.
Absolutely. Like, and just both awesome shows. So
I did the Crypto Grave-Yo.
The Crypto Grave-Yo. That's right. That's the hybrid of these two shows. So and we should probably tweet that out when we release them. So take a listen to these promos, and make sure you guys check out these shows.
Welcome to the Cryptonaut Podcast, hosted by Mark Storrs,
Chris Carnicelli, Rob Morphy.
Join us weekly as we explore everything from aliens,
cryptozoology, the occult,
ghosts,
paranormal phenomenon, ufology,
and unsolved mysteries.
All while keeping a close eye on our reptilian overlords that dwell in the flat, hollow, robot-infested Earth. This is the Cryptonaut Podcast.
We are available at CryptonautPodcast.com. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, and YouTube.
Good evening, everybody, or morning or afternoon or whatever. My name is Adam.
And I'm Matt.
And we are Graveyard Tales. Now, if you like stories of ghosts, hauntings, the paranormal, preternatural, and the downright weird, and you enjoy a few laughs as well, then you should probably check us out.
Find us anywhere you get your podcast. Come join our Facebook group at Graveyard Tales Podcast or on Twitter at GRVEY. Just go search Graveyard Tales.
That would be easier. We look forward to seeing you in the graveyard.
See you soon.
And we're back. So make sure you guys go check out those shows. All right, so we're moving on here to our second phantom ship of the night. And it was kind of funny, actually, when we were kind of looking through all the different phantom ships and ghost ships. There was a whole, there's a lot, obviously. Many of which that were in, most of the articles are in other languages and stuff. But we settled on a Canadian one. A Chilean and a Canadian.
Yeah.
Kind of random, I guess. Eh? Anyway.
I like it.
So this phantom ship is known as the Fire Ship of Chaleur Bay, also known as the Bathurst Phantom Ship. It's kind of shared between Quebec and New Brunswick as a legend.
Cool.
And this area of the east coast of Canada is known basically for it being a territory of the Micmac First Nations people before European contact. And we're familiar with the Micmac First Nations from Canadian Pickers when we used to watch that show, because they'd be traveling in the East Coast and they would always find these really cool Micmac hand-woven bags for carrying fish and furs and stuff.
Yeah.
Really, really crazy craftsmanship.
Some
really
of them
cool.
really well preserved, too.
I would love to find one of those. That'd be sweet.
Did they find a whalebone at one point that was like a Micmac?
I think they did. It was some sort of a weapon of some kind that had been carved out of a whalebone or something cool.
Or
like
an
that.
ornate staff or something. Anyway.
So this is the territory where these people were established before European contact. And it was actually also the territory where I've got it here. Jacques Cartier visited and did some things, and it was basically just a super high traffic port all throughout, from the 16th century all the way through up until full blown colonization, right? Okay, so this is kind of similar in a sense to the teaser, like you referenced at the top of the show as well, in terms of it being not a glow like the Caliuche, but a flaming ship.
Cool.
The question is why, where is it from, or what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so it's typically seen as a form of ghostly light, but with more of a glow, more of a reddish glow, like flame light glow. What's most interesting about this is it always seems to take place before a storm, typically.
Oh, interesting.
There have been some that claim to have seen it during the day, but most of the time it's in the evening and before a storm is coming, which is kind of neat.
That's cool.
To tie it into the Caliuche, it is also typically seen as a 3-mast galley ship, similar to those of the Portuguese and other travelers in the 16th century that would have been in the area.
The conquistadores.
Exactly. Essentially, so yeah, it looks like a 3-mast galley ship set ablaze in the bay when the conditions are just right. So it has to be before the storm is coming in. And the legends basically say that, and the legends as to where it came from and where it could be now are both extremely dark, and they're dark
Cool.
stories.
Dark origins.
Excuse me. So, in late 1800s and through the turn of the century, there were a ton of ships heading in and out of Chaleur Bay, and they were mainly merchant ships, some passenger ships, and at this time there was absolutely no lighthouse. And there was also pirates, privateers, big air quotes, privateers, right? But they were essentially just pirates, like we've discussed before.
This is definitely past the golden age of piracy, for sure.
Absolutely, definitely. So, but at this time in the bay, there was no lighthouse. And so this is where we get the first origin story of this phantom ship.
Already bad news bears. No lighthouse? That's kind of necessary.
you know what? You'd think that that's some good foreshadowing as to why there's a phantom ship, but it's actually not what you're probably thinking.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's hear it.
And I'll get into more of a description of the ship itself as we go through here, because of course there's very similar things to the teaser, like people can hear screaming on board, scrambling the deck trying to escape, people jumping off the ship attempting to escape. Some claim that they can hear Portuguese being screamed. Others claim that it's English.
Portuguese?
Some claim it's French.
So it's that clear that they can actually pick up
some of the stories
and words?
Yes. And there's actually been other ghostly sightings too, and I'll get to that as well. Okay. So, but like I said, at the time there was no lighthouse. And this is according to the Bathurst, New Brunswick city website. So ships back then would sail into the bay, and as they lowered their sails, they would fly a special flag for a pilot vessel. So a pilot vessel would come out and guide them through this sort of narrow section into the bay because they knew where the rocks were and stuff like that, right? So they could get you to the shore safely. There was one particular merchant who was more or less a privateer, not a merchant, but he called himself a merchant, who made frequent visits to this coastal sort of village region, and he became well acquainted with the Micmac people and could speak their dialect of Algonquin.
Wow.
This guy went by the name of Captain Craig. I tried to dig up some more stuff on him. It's kind of a little vague. I couldn't get a first name.
Captain Craig. Isn't that his first name?
It's fairly, well, is it? I don't know.
Craigie?
Craigie Craigerson. Maybe his first name's Captain. And he just happened to be a captain.
His name's Craig.
Craig Craigerson.
That's a weird name. Hey, Craig. Sorry.
No, it is. It's like, what? That sounds English.
It is.
Something, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like an English privateer.
Yeah.
Or something like that. European, clearly. I tried looking into it. It seems like he was likely a real person, but I couldn't find too much other details on it.
Okay.
But he made regular visits in the legends to this village. Spoke Algonquin, visited there every year. So, in the Bathurst official legend of the story, there was one morning when Captain Craig's ship was seen in the bay, and they waved their flag to the pilot vessel. And after they had done so, the ship came up, brought them back to the shore safely, no big deal, and they began doing what they normally would. They were trading for furs, resupplying the ship with fish, other goods, usually trying to swindle the Micmac people out of furs by trading them alcohol and things like, like getting them drunk and like the typical stories like that, right? Taking advantage of people, right?
Yeah.
A typical pirate, so to speak.
That's very convincing, though, because he knows the language and he's making inroads that way. And then just to flip it around, it's just the classic colonial narrative of just taking over and just being a total dick.
Oh, but he's got some things coming to him here. Let me just take a sip of my pale ale here.
What are you enjoying over there, Andrew?
I'm enjoying a nice local Vice and Virtue pale ale. Now we'll have to tag Vice and Virtue in this episode when we post it. All right. So his crew's on shore. Everything's all normal, right? So they end the afternoon and they've sort of completed their business and they're heading back to the ship. So they have the pilot vessel. They're kind of guide them. They're taken back out to their boat and they're ready to set sail. Basically, they had just begun to set sail just as the pilot vessel was sort of leaving, like floating away, right? Like heading back to shore. When the man piloting the vessel, who, as the legend goes, was a very large Micmac man, he heard someone crying and moaning and a little bit of screaming coming from right where he was, like below at the what would be below deck, because he's in his like dinghy or whatever, right?
Oh, really?
But at this point, the rope, the ladder or whatever that they had climbed up to get back up was still down. So he quickly climbs back onto the boat and demands that Captain Craig lower the sail immediately and to drop the anchor because he sensed that something was very, very wrong and he knew they had to stop the ship.
Yeah.
So the captain and his first mate outright refuse. However, when the pilot he threatened them, he was a massive, massive dude. And they were still close enough to the shore that they knew that he could easily jump off, get back, and that if this didn't end well, then they weren't going to return there and make it like a nice peaceful trip the next time or be able to manipulate them in the same way, right?
Yeah.
So they're refusing at the beginning. This big, huge Micmac guy basically intimidates the captain. Even though they've got a bunch of crew, he doesn't want to just say, like, kill this guy. He has a little more sense than that. And so he reluctantly agrees. The pilot ends up, I call it pilot, but, the guy.
Captain
He ends up peeking into the cargo hold. And he finds two young Micmac girls who are tied up, completely covered with furs, like completely buried in them so you could hardly hear them. The pirates had, of course, kidnapped them with the intentions, of course, having their way with them at sea and then tossing them into the middle of the ocean on their trip back to Europe.
Oh, lovely. Just some disposable human beings.
Yeah, classy, right?
I'm sure it happened all the time.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting. I saw a Vice article relatively recently. There was this mural on a building in Bathurst that was of the two Micmac girls, like, tied up.
Really?
Quite tasteless, kind of a tasteless mural. It had been up for a long, long time, and they it's finally been taken down.
Oh, that's
even
good.
though it is part of the legend, like, the story can stay, but I mean, that was a bit of a... put that up on the side of an entire building, you know what I mean?
Oh,
like,
God, no.
That's
Yeah.
kind of, it's a bit much.
It is, yeah.
So, like I said, being Micmac himself, the pilot frees the girls.
The pilot. Why is he called the pilot?
Well, like the pilot ship. Like, he was the pilot vessel.
Okay,
Right.
I see what you mean. Mhm.
Like, right.
Right.
So and we don't know his name.
guide,
So I'm just
so
calling
to
him the
speak.
guy, the pilot.
Yeah.
Right? So he frees these two girls. And the crew allow him to do so. Reluctantly, I suppose. So he brings the two girls back to the coast and reunites them with, attempts to reunite them with their parents. He doesn't actually know who they are, but brings them back. And the legends say that the two were so grateful, they didn't know how to thank him for freeing them. However, they ominously advised the man not to return to that ship, neither that day or ever again should that ship return to the bay, and the pilot flag be flown again, right?
Wow.
Because as a terrible misfortune was coming. And it came very, very quickly for Captain Craig and his crew. So the anchor was lifted, the sails were pulled up, and Captain Craig had navigated for only 10 minutes, as the story goes, when a massive swell suddenly came up over the deck and sent the ship careening into nearby rocks. Basically, the crew that were on deck were launched into the sea, drowned instantaneously. The rest of the crew below deck would have drowned because the ship sank very, very quickly. The only two that managed to survive were the captain and his first mate, very briefly on deck, clinging to a lifeboat. But they too drowned very, very quickly in the nearby waters as nobody on shore went to their aid. Mm-hmm. So that very same... So the girls on shore watched this happen, along with other people in the village at that location. And the same evening, later on, there were signs of a storm coming in. And while the locals watched the storm coming in, there was a massive red light that slid out over the surface of the bay, as the story goes. And basically, people could not believe their eyes because this massive ball of fire took the exact three-mast form of Captain Craig's ship.
Whoa.
So the masts and all. And the people could even see the crew members on the deck, lowering the sails, throwing the anchor, and lifting the flag as a signal for the pilot, as if nothing had happened. Yet the ship was on fire.
So like they're reliving what they had just lived. So it's almost as if this has become what we've talked about before, right? Where it becomes an echo of something that's happened in the past that results in something very traumatic and something very tragic, I guess. Like, these guys are obviously ruthless pirates / profiteers. That's brutal, though. And you know what that reminded me of? How you said it's like a big swell came up out of nowhere. So obviously there's no signs of a storm coming in.
Right.
And it was alluded to quite ominously by the family. But that makes me think of like a rogue wave. Like what we discussed when we were talking about the Great Lakes Triangle.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Bannockburn.
The what?
The Bannockburn, the ship.
Yeah.
Like, just the rogue wave.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere, up over the bow, down you go.
That's it.
But are larger forces at work
Oh,
with that.
totally.
And clearly, I mean, of course, this ties into, of course, a curse from two indigenous girls. Mm-hmm. Clearly, they must have been the daughters of a shaman or something.
Oh, someone quite powerful, you'd imagine. If this has any sort of...
So what do you make of that story?
I actually really enjoyed that story. Thanks for that. I have a couple questions. Like, did Captain Craig's ship have a name at all?
No,
No?
I couldn't find it.
Yeah. Not that it really matters for this, because it's just called the Fire Ship of Charlotte Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a ship that appears in this specific bay.
Yeah.
What are the dimensions of this bay? Like, did you kind of look into that at all? Like, is it quite big? Is it comparable to...
It's large, but there's it's hard to navigate, obviously, because of a series of very small islands, rocks. It's very rocky and jagged.
Okay.
And therefore, obviously, you needed the pilot because they're not, they're not being a lighthouse and stuff. Uh-huh. But yeah, obviously back then it would have been a tight space.
Tight space, yeah. Because it does remind me of when I looked just on Google Maps. I was looking at the location of where the El Caliuch was said to appear, and it's off the coast of the island of the Chilote. But it actually, so the island is a little bit off. It's kind of like I would say it's southeast to the shoreline, but then the shore actually takes a dip and does this bay. There's like this quite a significant looking bay, and then it just goes back along the jaggedy coastline. But I was like thinking to myself, like, okay, so that is a bay. Is this kind of responsible for sort of manipulating the visuals or like that type of thing?
I see what you're saying.
Interestingly, though, a lot of these sightings, you say that these come about right before a storm usually, or maybe just before, like in the evening, kind of that sort of like the transitionary sort of time from day to night.
Yeah.
And so some people would try to explain that as like, oh, well, it's the movement of the sun as it sets. You get these light refractions, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't necessarily make sense because with these two examples, because with this you get an East Coast example, and then with the Chilean you get the West Coast.
Right.
So you're getting opposite sight lines, directional sight lines, right?
Yeah.
So maybe when we get into theories, that can come into play more.
Yeah, possibly. That's an interesting point.
I'm just looking at the bay here now. It's quite an interesting looking bay. It almost looks like a sea monster. Looks very Ogopogo-esque.
Chaleur Bay?
Yeah. It's very okay. That's an interesting point. I really like that story. Ended very well. It didn't have anything to do with what I thought, like with the lighthouse.
Yeah, like just straight smashing on the rocks because you can't see where you're going. That's
The whole time I was thinking to myself, the stories we heard when we were doing research for Roanoke, and how ruthless the attempts to colonize and gain a settlement there, and the interactions between the settlers and that or profiteers / settlers. You know, the profiteers were the ones causing the waves that were quite negative, and then the settlers were the ones that just ended up like reaping all the terrible things that came about.
They took the flack for it a lot of time. So that's one version as to the origin of the ship, and obviously that's a paranormal explanation if you believe that to be what it is.
It's like a cursed ship.
Right, cursed ship. There is another epic version of the story. And it, like, sorry.
I love how you said that. You're like, there is another epic version of the story. That's so calmly. It's epic
version. Dun, dun, dun. I need to do like the Matt Devlin.
Matt Devlin, I was
like, Moto engines. But okay, so this one is a story about a Portuguese captain and again a privateer. And it's in and around the same time. So very, very similar to the first one, but different in its own right. And honestly, this one's a little more hardcore, in my opinion.
This is a lot earlier, too. It says 1501 versus the other one was 1800s.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is in the prime time of being a pirate.
Absolutely. So, in 1500, there was a pirate privateer, by the name of Gaspar Corte Real. He was a Portuguese privateer, okay? And he visited the area of Chaleur Bay and basically all up and down the east coast of Canada and the United States doing his thing. And he claimed to be a navigator, but he was deceptive and crooked and stole stuff all the time. So, his intentions were even more grim, though, than most pirates. It wasn't just about stealing furs, goods, and, taking advantage of the locals for their wares, so to speak. I was out walking, selling my wares. But this guy's business was the slave trade. He was going up and down the East Coast, basically year after year, just stealing North American indigenous people for the European slave trade.
Just kidnapping them.
Yes. He wasn't. He was thinking to himself like. So I mean, it's kind of interesting historically when you think about it. Like the idea that obviously Africa was the hub of that, right? And the Portuguese were one of the first nations to kind of venture in, and then just the idea of going that far away, like to North America,
to get slaves.
Yeah. It's crazy.
That is kind of insane.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just a crazy world we live in anyway.
It is. It really is.
So, okay. So, right, where am I at here? Okay. The story goes that he traded in the area in the past, and on one visit, he tempted many of the local indigenous men, so this would have been Micmacs, to come aboard his ship for a gathering of sorts, basically giving them, this is so classic, right? The gestures of goodwill, good faith, cooking food, having food, like alcohol, obviously, so food and drink, and music was played, and the crew was to make sure that they were intoxicated. Once they were too far gone to know what was happening, they were led below deck to sleep it off. The problem with this was, of course, that they awoke already miles and miles out to sea without any land in sight. They had been tricked and stolen en route to Portugal and or en route to Portuguese ports where slaves could be bought and sold.
Yeah.
So that is a grim thing to wake up to. Like that's going to really put a emphasis on your hangover.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh yeah. That's a bad way to go.
But this guy's got some balls. because he not only does this, he returns the following year to go even further because he felt, oh, my last year of stealing these slaves was really successful. I'm going to go back, and they probably just forgot. What an idiot. So Gaspar returns the following year to penetrate further after all his success. He wasn't in
So much success.
So much success. Your mother would be so proud.
Oh, so proud.
And he obviously wasn't intimidated by it. The Micmac people, right? Like he wasn't thrown off by it at all. So
No, he's got guns. They've got bows and arrows.
that's right. Even though you got to load it one bullet at a
Very
time,
true,
which is a little cumbersome, but anyway.
Well, you've got a whole crew, all of them pointing at a single time, and they can, you know what I mean?
That's very true.
Yeah.
So he returned, but arriving late in the evening, the boat was anchored offshore. There was no pilot vessel, and at this point, I don't even think they would have been waving the flag. They probably would have been attempting to navigate on their own.
Yeah, because it's only 1502, right? This is way earlier than the first story.
And not only that, but just obviously these people aren't going to help you.
No.
Like anyone on shore isn't going to help you get to shore.
No.
So anyway.
You're on your own.
Right. So the crew goes to sleep. They're planning on navigating further in the morning to get to shore, right? But while they're asleep, the vengeful local Micmac people snuck aboard the ship, massacred the crew. The only one who was spared was the Captain Gaspar, but of course not for long. The story goes that he was tied up on a rock at low tide, and the entire, the village of where the original men the previous year had been stolen from, sat and watched and had a nice meal as a group as they slowly watched the waters rise and drown Gaspar in front of them.
That must have been satisfying.
Yeah, you'd think, right?
Ugh, I don't know if I'd be able to watch that, to be honest.
Well,
I would probably want it to happen, but I just don't know if I could physically endure eating and witnessing it. You know what I mean?
I mean, of
I'm
all
one of
the
those
ways
people,
you're a softie.
I am. I'm one of those people that would be like, I do like the idea of revenge, especially in this case. Maybe I'm just a little bit of a softie.
I mean, he had it coming, obviously.
Yeah.
Big time.
He does.
Quite frankly, I think it should have been worse.
I would be like, I'd pull Louise from like Bob's Burgers, where it's like she's like trying to be all hardcore and trying to be like, yeah, we're doing this, and then be like have a last minute change of heart. Be like, oh, but it's Christmas time.
Boo, booing you
doing
right
the
now.
right thing. Yeah, no.
Boo.
Doing the right thing didn't exist in this situation. I don't
Not
think.
really. Although his brother, Gaspar's brother, sort of tried to do the right thing and by their family anyway. So the following year, his brother returns because of course Gaspar doesn't come back with another shipment of slaves. So things are getting a little fishy. So in 1502, his brother returns and he arrives, same location, to find that his brother's ship is still anchored in the same spot, completely intact. So he sees this as a good sign, obviously. They come a little closer, they anchor their own ship, they hop in their own boats, and they paddle over to board his brother's ship. They're calling out as they come towards it. There's no answer, but still at this point, they're not really too concerned. They board the ship, but as soon as they do, it's surrounded by dozens of war canoes, and the brig of his brother's ship, very Trojan horse situation, bursts open and it's full of Micmac warriors. They saw the approaching Portuguese ship and had it all planned out for when the next person came back.
Yeah.
So,
This is awesome.
in a desperate attempt, though, to flee this attack, they're being ambushed, he quickly knocks over, basically, I guess it would have been, I don't know if it would have been kerosene, something like that. Yeah, an oil lamp of some kind.
Whale oil.
And sets it ablaze because he knew at that point, basically he was committing suicide for himself and the members of the crew that had boarded the ship. Oh. They knew they weren't going to make it.
Yeah.
So he sets the ship ablaze and he vowed in his last breath that his spirit and the spirits of those on board his brother's ship would roam the Bay of Chaleur for 1,000 years. Very specific.
Okay. Yeah. No one will ever forget what
Yeah.
happened that day.
It's like, okay, buddy, we just got to wait it out 1,000 years, all right?
Dang, that's a story.
Yeah. And there's kind of some different varying details to that. Like, one of them is that the fire spreads so quickly that even some of the Micmac warriors and his crewmen are catching fire and jumping off the ship as it's happening. And so that is something people see in the ghostly phantom. It's people abandoning ship while their skin is on, like, they're caught ablaze themselves.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Gross.
There's even, and then this is where we get So this is what people claim to see. They claim to see this flaming ship, people screaming in Portuguese. But there's also apparitions seen on shore, which is very, very, very strange. There's a few different stories, and to be totally honest with you, the one that I had, the blog got taken down. So I was like, I was kind of transcribing and looking at it, and I went back for it, and it was like, this website's been removed.
Their annual subscription ran out.
It must have.
End of the year.
Yeah, and I couldn't find the story anywhere else. But it was about this lady named, it was like Mrs. Poppin or something like that. But she's a real person for sure. And I'm gonna keep digging this up, and I will post it to the forum when I find it, so that everyone can go check it out anyway.
Cool.
But the story basically goes that this is a woman who lives by the ocean, by the bay, down by the bay.
Where the watermelon.
And then this is recent. This is in like the 50s, 60s, I believe, when she essentially is outside, and she claimed to hear kind of like an injured person, to go around the corner of her front yard to find essentially a Portuguese sailor pleading with her in Portuguese. She doesn't know what he's saying, to help him, holding his hands out to help him, and he's severely burned. And as the story goes, that as she approaches him to figure out what the heck she's seen, he flies past her. Like, he runs, except for the fact that he is legless. Ooh. His legs have been essentially, like, burnt and melted. Like,
so it's not even like they're just missing? Like, you can't see the legs? Like the legless Roman soldiers, for example?
No, exactly. He's literally, like, they're stumps of, like, flesh. He's bleeding. He's essentially, like, massive, like, third-degree burn trauma ghost. But that's so weird, though, right? Because it's separate from a ship, and it's just in the area. But I find that to be the creepiest thing ever. Because,
that's really neat. That really goes far to explode a lot of the more mundane explanations, right? As far as this being maybe not something paranormal, but maybe some sort of naturally occurring phenomena.
Could be. Yeah. I don't know. So, what do you make of this one? I mean, essentially, I've already given the description, but yeah, 3-mast ship, engulfed in flames, people scurrying around the rigging on the deck, trying to save themselves.
There's a lot of similarities to the El Caliuch and to it's more specifically to the teaser, I would say, with this one in particular. And if you guys haven't listened to our cross-country checkup, I think we called it Legends of the North. And we did cover the teaser in that, and I think it was part 2 of that series. But if you haven't checked that out, I would definitely highly recommend that, just for some more context.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, like, both of these stories they're so incredible, right? And so amazing, and definitely colored with, I would imagine, some like reaches or whatever, embellishments or something. But I really, honestly, am having a hard time picking my favorite.
I know, right? I do have a sighting here, actually.
Really?
I wanted to read out.
You know, I kind of like the first one you told better, though, about how it could have been like
Captain
the Micmac
Craig.
girls. But the second one makes more sense if it is like this, like the woman claiming to see a crewman, that type of thing. Because obviously there was no fire involved in the first crash, like.
No, unless the fire is just like hellfire, like they're just a damned ship, and that's why it's forever burning, and
That's an interesting discrepancy, right? Or contrast, I guess, is the idea that this is definitely eternal damnation. Like, we're just stuck, and we're just going to be roaming for all eternity in the 7 seas. And then with the El Caliuch, for example, we get both. So there's a little bit more ambiguity there. Because that's what you do most often find, is the theme with ghost ships is eternal damnation.
Pretty much.
This idea that you will forever, be destined to just remain in this state of purgatory, so to speak.
Yeah.
All right, so what was your sighting?
Okay, I have a sighting here, and the reason I wanted to give this is because it is kind of detailed. It's the most detailed I could find, but also because it kind of throws a monkey wrench into the first 2 stories for a couple of reasons, and we'll see it in a sec. So this was a sighting in the 1950s by a woman by the name of Florence Godin, and she was talking about this and interviewed later on. She saw this when she was younger. But when she was interviewed about it, she was working at a local museum and was a member of the Irish and Scottish associations in Bathurst and was basically studying lineages and writing about it for the museum and stuff like that. So, but her story goes as follows. It was basically in and around 9:30 p.m., and I believe this was in July. I didn't write this down, but it was the summertime because she was walking from one person's house to the next, and she wasn't wearing winter clothes in the story, so it was summertime. She looked east across the water close to the White's Channel, which is just this narrow stretch through Shaler Bay. And there it was, as she described it. The Shaler Bay ghost ship set afire. Some other people nearby also saw this, as got in turn and yelled at them to call the fire department. And there was actually a couple that got out of a taxi cab and watched this for a while with her as well. So she believed that there was something terribly wrong and that somebody needed to send out a freaking a Coast Guard vessel to help, right? So she quickly kind of realizes though, there's no way that this is a ship on fire because somebody would already be out there helping them, right? And she recalled, this was a quote from her, that there was a wharf that fishermen would use, and that wharf, they would use that wharf, and when it was done, basically, when wharves were of no use anymore and they couldn't even be disassembled to reuse, they would burn them. So sometimes they would burn them and even push them out and let them burn out in the bay. Yeah. Which obviously nowadays sounds like very illegal and not allowed, but in the 1950s I can totally see that being okay.
Oh yeah.
So, but
the way you keep saying wharf, just right. Wharf Arts Society.
The Wharf Arts Center. Oh, the Bob's references in our show. Okay, so, but this is where it's interesting. Okay, the front of the ship in question was facing her and the people on shore, so facing them.
Okay.
And its masthead was adorned with a fully carved woman, clearly on the front of the ship.
Interesting.
So that's a very clear sighting. It reminds me of that's a classic pirate ship, right? Where you've got the mermaid on the front of your vessel, right?
And it does align with the timelines of the two stories that you told, right? The idea that this would have been a wooden ship, definitely. It would have been something that would have a carved woman, per se, or whatever. Yeah.
Here's the next interesting part. She clearly could see people on board panicking, as well as two distinct large dogs that she identified as French Mastiffs.
Oh, cool. What?
French Mastiffs being the key term here. So
not Portuguese.
Not looking to be a Portuguese ship, not looking to be a Spanish warship, not looking to be a British transport vessel. Okay. She continues on to say, there was a woman aboard who was being pulled back by another man. Then another man approached and brandished a sword. The clothing, from what Godden could share, was obviously was dated. So it was 16th century clothing. French Mastiffs, though?
I can say that, sorry, just on that it being a specific French Mastiff, if you look up Spanish Mastiff versus French Mastiff.
Very similar.
Very similar. And then even in English Mastiff,
is
very similar.
Sure.
So they could all be.
Sure.
It's just like the Cane Corsos. Remember when I was so obsessed with those and there's all those different versions of them?
It's just an interesting thought.
It is.
The other thing that she pointed out that was really specific and very interesting is that she couldn't recollect any cannons or guns on the ship, but it was still a 3-masted ship.
Oh.
So no cannons or guns. That is not going to be a 16th century Portuguese vessel.
Well, probably would have been more like 1800.
They would, or even then, it's this is clearly not a warship.
No, it would be a merchant ship.
Yeah.
Unprotected. Which pirates would have preyed upon.
Right. So not a privateering vessel, not an outright pirate vessel, and not a government-sanctioned warship.
Okay. But, the way you did describe the first story and the guy that was kind of parading as a merchant but was actually more of a privateer, those were blended together, those terms. So even if he was a privateer, it doesn't mean that he would actually have full-on, artillery and stuff on, cannons and stuff on board.
Right.
So he could have just had more, or less obvious coercive means using violence that isn't that,
The one interesting thing that this kind of brings up, and I'm not going to dive into it because it's a whole other rabbit hole, but just the idea of this possibly being it could have been a French ship. In the sense that because there were a lot of battles between the English and French in the forming of Canada and the forming of Quebec, obviously, and New Brunswick. And of course, New Brunswick, which a lot of people, even in Canada, don't know, speaks French. It's bilingual province. It's not just Quebec, where you have to be able to speak French. So Yeah, lots of battles at sea between the English and French in that area for sure. So could it have been from some sort of carnage left over from an on-sea battle between the French and English?
Some sort of skirmish of sorts.
Yeah. So there's a few. I mean, we're getting into kind of like, let's just migrate into all the theories and explanations here. One of them for this Bathurst Phantom ship, or the Shaler Bay fire ship, is this thing called St. Elmo's fire.
Oh,
it's kind of crazy. So it's basically electricity slowly discharged from the atmosphere to the Earth.
To the Earth.
Okay, I just pulled up the wiki here. This is where we need Chris. But
I didn't throw this out to him because we didn't come across this before I sent him that message. But I do have some points from Chris Berkerbine, our Dash of Science friend.
Okay, so I don't know exactly how this would take the form of a ship. But St. Elmo's fire is, as according to Wikipedia, is a weather phenomena in which luminous plasma is created by a coronal discharge from a sharp or pointed object in a strong electrical field. So, such as those generated by thunderstorms or created by a volcanic eruption.
Huh.
So it's a strong, a pointed object in a strong electric field in the atmosphere.
Interesting. So a corona discharge, like that's a completely foreign term to me, but according to Wikipedia, this means that it's an electrical discharge brought on by the ionization of a fluid, such as air surrounding a conductor that's electrically charged. Electrically charged. So where's Chris? We need a dash science in here.
I know. So, but I mean, the thing that's standing out to me here is obviously the pointed object. So it's like so the explanation of St. Elmo's fire for the ship is that would make sense for seeing the masts of the ship.
Okay, masts on fire. It seems as if this needs an actual physical thing to
that's what I was
be
thinking.
like a beacon, like almost like Tesla's coil kind of thing. But not that I would actually know, but...
Yeah. I have it continues on here. It's like ordinary shows itself as a tip of light on a pointed object such as a church steeple or a mast. In addition, is accompanied by a crackling noise.
So isn't it just like lightning?
Yeah, it sounds a heck of a lot like lightning, people. But of course, the people who sort of just toss this explanation away say that when they see the Phantom ship, it doesn't make any noise. There's no crackling noise. There's no distinctive noise from anything other than the ominous screams of those aboard, which doesn't sound like a natural phenomenon.
No, it doesn't. It sounds like an echo from the past, like I said before.
There's another idea that's even more crazy, that the fire ship is some sort of phosphorescent marine life. But of course, biologists sort of think this is hilarious. Also, for one reason being that you would need a heck of a lot of phosphorescent marine life to come in together to make that happen.
Oh, I know what it is.
What?
It's a whale that went and rubbed up on some phosphorescent fungus and then ended up in the water.
Must have been.
Shaler Bay.
Oh, it's owls. It's gotta be water owls.
It's gotta be owls that light up and are underwater. Now we're just getting ridiculous.
Yeah, okay.
I wonder though, like, you make the argument for phosphorescent life, like such as algae. What if algae had somehow gotten rubbed up onto a whale?
And this whale is... I don't buy that. But it's like...
Maybe they're hitching a free ride.
I love it when in paranormal studies or Forteana, when the explanations are more extreme than the phenomena itself.
Actually, that's a really good point, yeah. Because you're making so many leaps. You're trying to find the Occam's razor, the most logical solution, but in doing that, you're actually creating all these fantastic,
illogical situations.
Ridiculous suggestions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
I like that idea of the St. Elmo's fire. I would love to dive into that a little bit more. Maybe if we do get a hold of Chris, that would be an interesting thing to
maybe
ask
we'll bust
about.
out a little bonus ep for this
Actually,
episode.
that would be a really good idea.
We haven't done that for a while, so maybe we can do that.
Oh, yeah. I'd really love to do that.
Stay tuned, everyone.
You know, that's interesting, though, that you say this phosphorescent marine life, because I did see some people alluding to the same sorts of ideas with the El Caluche and El Caluche. Yeah. but this idea that, maybe perhaps when people see it underwater, it is actually just this phosphorescent algae. But that to me doesn't make sense if it is moving at such a rapid pace. Like, that doesn't really make sense. Yeah. And
algae don't move that fast.
Yeah.
Or at all.
So another thing that we have to bring up here is something that'll actually be featured in our Patreon mini-sode for this month of December.
Yes.
And this is the idea that we're dealing with a version of what's known as Fata Morgana. And it's actually a type of, oh my gosh,
it's a visual phenomena.
It's a visual phenomena, but it's a
light phenomena?
It's a mirage.
Mirage, there
That's what I was trying to think.
I'm just looking at you. And it's an audio show, and Amber's just making all these arm gestures here. Yeah, just like...
What's that game? Charades?
Oh my god.
Let's play charades on a podcast.
Charades, the podcast. It's going to be a real hit.
Oh, yes. But anyway, so this Fata Morgana. So this is a phenomenon that normally makes ships, like that are literal ships existing in the seas, passing by coastlines, makes them appear as if they are floating above the sea line. And it does actually come about when you get a displacement of colder air underneath warmer air, and it traps light rays and can make sort of warp them.
It's weird.
And I was talking to Chris from A Dash of Science a little bit about this, and he did say that a lot of the times it has more to do with this, right? Like a temperature inversion than having to do with moisture and humidity. But he did say, actually, here, should I pull this up here?
Yeah, but might as well.
He did say that, okay. He says, usually Fata Morgana makes things look like they're floating, but if it is particularly hot and moist, my favorite word, moist, you can get a shimmer. And if combined with that light from the right direction, I could definitely see a fire effect. So that was his thoughts on the subject.
Interesting.
And this is definitely a real phenomena, this Fata Morgana, and there is a lot of research going in. Like Chris alluded to these research grants that were awarded to NASA to actually work on sort of technology, optical technology to combat this at sea and at long ranges, because it can affect people. What if you were on, say, on a Navy ship, and you see something that you think is another ship, unidentifiable, coming at you, blazing whatever, that could be cause for alarm.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if it is something that's totally, anachronistic, like a 3-masted ship, when we don't really use sailing ships to that size anymore.
No.
And, to that pedigree where
Right.
it has this ornate whatever sort of quality to it.
How cool would it be if we did?
Right? Yeah.
I just, honestly, I regret being born when I was. I just wish kind of that I could be a fly on the wall and go back and...
I would want to go back
Different
to,
times.
we were talking about this the other day, I'd want to go back to ancient Greek times. I'd probably want to be a part of the
Yes.
Minoan culture, because
That
they
would've
were
been
really,
sweet.
really egalitarian there.
Yeah,
It would have
it's
been pretty good for me as a girl.
Yeah, it would have actually in ancient times.
Yeah, or even Sparta. I would have loved it.
I mean, they still weren't progressive in the sense that they used slaves and stuff like that.
Well,
but
true.
as long as you were Minoan, you'd be all right.
Yeah. Right?
Right?
Unless you get to kidnap by someone else.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, so let's get into this more philosophical elements, because I really love this.
Sure.
And introducing this idea of ghost ships being mythical technological monsters.
Okay.
Can we bring in cryptozoology to this conversation? Is this something completely outside of that? I wanted to throw that out to you, my resident cryptozoologist here.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously, cryptozoology doesn't fall, in its technical sense, does not touch on any of this stuff, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think of, I mean, Adam from the Pine Barrens Institute is going to hate me for this, but I mean, if you consider some aspects of cryptozoology being related to more of the paranormal, I always come back to Skinwalker Ranch and the idea of that one of those UCLA researchers that was hired by Bigelow seeing a creature enter and exit a portal.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of an unknown creature. It's unknown, but it's not unknown in the sense it's like a thylacine, because it's not from our world.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I feel like there's elements to the Caliuch that aren't a damned ship. So yeah, I'd say you could argue that you could tie it in.
It's more amorphous than that.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, if you do get into the nuances of, say, the actual definition of cryptozoology, where it's crypto, which means hidden, and then zoology, which is the study of animals.
As we
then
know.
we're not particularly talking about biological things here. So
Right.
maybe not, but, there are elements, I thought. I thought that was an interesting sort of idea to throw out.
No, I think that's an interesting question because of the, people seeing it as a whale and things
Yeah.
like that. I mean, that's I mean, we did a Thunderbirds episode as a cryptozoology episode, but that is a mythical creature of folklore.
True.
It's not a missing
Could
animal
be it
or
could
whatever.
be a spirit
right?
more
exactly.
than a...
So that ties into stuff like this.
I also had this other thought here, and not my thought originally, but I'm just going to introduce it like from other philosophers and things. But the idea of a ship as an entity in its own right, with an identity, a personality, that can similarly shift into a phantasmal state, much the same way as a drowned sailor's soul. So it is a ghost in itself, like, you know.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. Well,
Yes.
you know what that makes me think of?
What?
I don't know why. It's going to sound super random, but like Robert the Doll. Or objects that can take on energy.
Yeah, and can
Why not a ship?
and can be sentient in themselves almost to a degree.
Especially if it's a ship that's seen its share of, say, like people dying below deck, slave trade, a mutiny perhaps, violent, terrible, horrific things that cling to objects.
Totally. So how would that color the personality of the ship? Would it be an evil ship? Would it be something to counteract that evil and maybe spend its time trying to gather the drowned sailors of whatever, if you want to sort of believe that whole idea of the Caliuch there?
Sure.
Even though it is colored by these sort of black sorcerers or something. These brutal.
Yeah. Doing their weird like Mardi Gras freaky deaky party up there. Like
Mardi Gras.
I picture it like a Mardi Gras. I don't know why. Like they're just like dancing on deck and it's all like a big,
I like this idea you had written down here, where it's like water is a portal. That's a really huge.
That's a rabbit hole.
That's ripe for the conversation.
But yeah, so we've touched on this a million times, like in other episodes and stuff like that, and people are familiar with this. But I mean, water obviously has very sacred properties to it, and it's often seen as a point of crossing over or a portal. And we touched on that in which episode
Kitesh,
was it?
Invisible
Kitesh
City.
for sure. Also, it came up in looking at Celtic folklore and the idea of rivers, the threshold of crossing a river being a metaphor for going to the other side and things like that. But when it comes to ghost ships and the idea of a damned ship being trapped and like this purgatory, right? I feel like water plays a cool role in that, the developing of that, like something getting stuck. You know what I mean? Like it's a portal, and it is in a physical sense too. Like even when you're above water and you dip your hand beneath, and just like even the way it looks when you go beneath, when you know what I mean? How, like the meniscus around and all that kind of stuff. Totally, it's a portal.
I'm getting another, well, maybe like less of a portal, but more of like, say, when we looked at Annihilation, for example, we get that the viewpoint through water, the idea that water can create a prism, it can refract things in different ways, it can distort things as well.
I guess what I'm trying to say, okay, it's not a portal in and of itself, but the presence of water and the shape of it and the way it exists can facilitate these transfers and
induce it,
right? And act as a medium for it.
Yeah,
so,
that's a great It's the site at which these things take place.
Yeah. Exactly.
The site of ambiguity of it all.
Right. So I mean, I just think that's so cool. Yeah, like in Kitesh with Lake Svetloyar, people hear sounds. They hear the bells. They hear the cries coming from beneath the lake, and they feel the presence. But the lake is super shallow, and it's been dragged. There's nothing there. But that comes back to the Foucault thing. It's a place without a place.
Yes.
It is somewhere.
It is
but
somewhere.
It isn't,
it's slipped through.
Right. It's through one of those cracks.
Exactly.
I love that. And I'm a firm
And we can
believer
hear
in
it, right?
too.
We can hear the bells. We can hear the singing. We can hear, and that's a different sense. That's an intangible sense, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, this is totally a kind of out of left field and stuff, but that's where eventually when it's once it's not like kind of a too soon type conversation, when it's like an MH370 and like things that just disappear. What crack did you go through? You know what I mean? Like things like potentially, yeah. You know what I mean? And stuff like that.
Yeah.
Very, very cool stuff.
I forgot about MH370.
There's been so many others like it too. I mean,
is there any updates on that one? Like
no, but even to go back to our Great Lakes episode,
yeah.
like where I can't remember the one of the first ones we mentioned in the aircraft episode. Gone, vanished, no trace. It was a full-size passenger liner, just outright gone. It slipped through some sort of a crack.
Must have.
The interesting thing there, though, by comparison to this, is of course we don't see phantom planes flying by You know, like there's a ghost plane flying overhead. It's always a ghost ship.
To identify, though.
True.
Like, maybe if you saw and looked up and it looked like a World War II plane, it would be quite obvious. But even that, right, you still see those, right? Like,
people do
reconstructed
claim.
ones and stuff. So it would be hard, because you'd have to break out the binoculars and be like, is there a ghost in there?
That's not quite the same. Anyway, this was, so that's, I mean.
That's really fun.
That pretty much wraps it up.
This has been a really cool conversation.
I've enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. Thank you, my dear.
It was a really fun week, and we hope you guys enjoyed it. We want to hear your take, of course.
Absolutely.
We always want to. And just to reiterate, we do have our special Patreon mini-sode free couple of weeks all the way up to the new year. We're going to be putting that on for all of our regular listeners.
Yes.
And so make sure you hit that link in this episode description. That will take you to our Patreon page.
Absolutely.
Because there's a fun bunch of stuff on there that you should probably check out. We would recommend. And all of our Patreon members would too, because they're having a great time over there.
Absolutely.
And is there anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, well, go check out Patreon. I'm super stoked for that. You guys are going to love that when we have that for all of you. And shout out to Charlene Ramler. Yeah. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name right. I'm going to triple check and make sure I am.
We got our first executive producer.
Yes, so Charlene has joined our team on Into the Portal as a producer of the show via Patreon.
Yep.
So you guys can hop on there and check out what she's joined onto. And so she's basically contributing to the show and helping us keep the lights on and produce the show.
So thank you to our very first executive producer, Charlene Ramler.
There's Amber's serious voice.
Yeah.
There it is.
That's
and of course, thank you to all of our other patrons and all of our regular listeners. And you guys are all awesome.
You guys really are.
Whether you're, we appreciate all of you.
You will brighten our days.
Absolutely.
And if any of you got a free moment, just hop onto iTunes and give us a.
We need to stock up on reviews again, apparently.
Like, so, seriously, we've got that stupid Moira person that is just right at the top there, and I can't get rid of her now. So you guys gotta help me out.
That's right.
Help us out.
So, once again, thank you so much for joining us here on Into the Portal. You can reach us at Into the Portal mailbox at gmail.com, at Into the Portal podcast on Instagram, at Into the Portal 1 on Twitter. Come join the conversation and hit us up on Facebook too. We love chatting with you guys there.
Yep.
So, enjoy the rest of your Sunday and week, and we will see you guys on Friday for another Film Friday. Mm-hmm. Stay tuned.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree.